The night Dominic Russo noticed me, I thought my biggest problem was making it through another shift without crying in the employee bathroom. I had no idea that a single drop of blood on a polished restaurant floor was about to change both of our lives. The rain hammered against the tall windows of Russo's on Fifth like impatient fingers. Every flash of lightning turned the glass silver for a second before the city lights swallowed it again. Friday nights were always busy, but tonight felt worse. My feet ached, my shoulders burned, and the smile I'd been wearing for the past 8 hours felt heavier than the tray balanced in my hands. At 26, I worked double shifts 6 days a week. Rent in Brooklyn wasn't getting any cheaper, and neither were groceries. Most nights, I told myself I could handle it. Most nights, I almost believed it. Table 14 needs another bottle. My manager called from across the dining room. I nodded immediately. Got it. The restaurant buzzed with conversation. Expensive suits. Expensive watches. Expensive lives. Russo's attracted the kind of people who never looked at price tags. The kind of people who arrived in black SUVs and left surrounded by security. And somewhere above them all, hidden inside the private VIP floor, sat Dominic Russo himself. I'd worked there for 11 months and had only seen him twice. Both times from a distance. Both times long enough to understand why people lowered their voices when they said his name. I grabbed the wine bottle and headed toward the service hallway. That's when I heard the familiar voice behind me. My stomach dropped before I even turned around. Ryan. My boyfriend. Or at least the man I kept telling myself I would leave someday. There you are, he said. His smile looked normal to anyone passing by. Friendly. Casual. But I knew better. I'm working, I whispered. You shouldn't be here. I've been calling for 2 hours. I glanced toward the dining room. Nobody seemed to notice us. The music was too loud. The crowd too busy. My phone's in my locker. His expression hardened for half a second before the smile returned. Funny how that's always the excuse. My pulse quickened. I hated this version of him. The one who spoke softly while making every word feel heavy. Ryan, please. Please what? He asked. Please stop embarrassing me. I looked down. Not because I was afraid of him. At least that's what I kept telling myself. I was just tired. Too tired to argue. Too tired to defend myself again. The conversation continued for another minute that felt like an hour. When it finally ended, I stood alone in the hallway staring at the floor. My hands trembled slightly. My eyes burned. I took a slow breath and told myself to pull it together. Then I saw it. A tiny red drop against the white marble near my shoe. For a second, I just stared at it. Rainwater. Wine. Maybe nothing at all. But before I could move, another pair of polished black shoes stopped beside it. The hallway suddenly felt colder. I looked up. Dominic Russo stood there. 6'3", dark suit. Ice blue eyes. Silent. Watching. His gaze moved from the floor to me. And in that moment, something changed. Not in me. In him. I didn't know it yet. But the most powerful man in New York had just noticed I was hurting. I have never been afraid of silence until that night. Dominic Russo did not say a single word for what felt like forever. He simply stood there in the service hallway, staring at the tiny red drop on the marble floor, and then at me. The noise from the dining room suddenly felt distant, like it belonged to another world. People laughed. Glasses clinked. A piano played somewhere beyond the walls. But none of it seemed real anymore. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Mr. Russo, I managed. My voice sounded small. He did not respond. His eyes stayed on me. Cold. Focused. Calculating. Then a man in a dark suit appeared from around the corner. I recognized him immediately. Everyone who worked at the restaurant knew him. Vincent Hale. Dominic's right hand. The man who handled problems before they became disasters. Vincent slowed when he noticed us. His eyes moved from Dominic to me, then to the floor. Something shifted in his expression. Dominic finally spoke. His voice was low, calm, controlled. Somehow that made it more intimidating. Bring her to me. That was all. 3 words. No anger. No raised voice. Nothing dramatic. Yet Vincent straightened immediately. Yes, sir. Dominic turned and walked away without another glance. The sound of his polished shoes faded down the corridor. I stood frozen. Emily. Vincent's voice was surprisingly gentle. Come with me. Am I fired? The question escaped before I could stop it. Vincent looked almost amused. No. Then why does he want to see me? You will have to ask him that yourself. Every instinct told me to run. Instead, I followed. We crossed the restaurant through a private elevator hidden behind a paneled wall near the kitchen. I had worked there nearly a year and had never been allowed inside. The elevator climbed silently. My stomach twisted tighter with every floor. The doors opened into another world. Dark wood, floor-to-ceiling windows, a view of Manhattan glowing beneath the storm. Everything looked expensive enough to belong in a museum. Vincent guided me toward a pair of black doors. Two security men stepped aside immediately. One opened the door. "Mr. Russo will see you now." My throat went dry. The office was enormous. A fireplace burned quietly against one wall. Shelves filled with leather-bound books lined another. Behind a massive desk sat Dominic Russo. He was reading something. He did not look up right away. That somehow made me even more nervous. Finally, he placed the paper down. His eyes found mine again. I felt exactly the same way I had downstairs. Seen. Completely seen. Sit. I obeyed before my brain caught up. Dominic studied me for several seconds. Not the way men usually looked at women. Not with curiosity. Not with judgment. More like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "How long have you worked here?" he asked. 11 months. He nodded once. "And how long has this been happening?" My stomach dropped. I knew immediately what he meant. I looked away. Toward the rain streaking the windows. Toward anything except those piercing blue eyes. "I do not know what you mean." Silence filled the room. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Then Dominic leaned back in his chair. That was not an answer. For the first time that night, fear was replaced by something else. Exhaustion. Pure exhaustion. I was tired of pretending everything was fine. Tired of smiling through long shifts. Tired of carrying burdens nobody seemed to notice. But Dominic Russo had noticed. And somehow that frightened me more than anything. I learned a long time ago that the truth could become a weakness the moment you gave it to the wrong person. That was why I kept my eyes on the rain beyond the windows and refused to answer. Dominic Russo waited. Most people filled silence because they were uncomfortable. He did not. He seemed perfectly content to let it stretch for as long as necessary. The fireplace crackled softly behind him. Manhattan shimmered beneath the storm outside. Somewhere 30 floors below, the restaurant continued operating as if my entire world was not unraveling. "Emily." My name sounded different in his voice. Not softer, just deliberate. "You are not in trouble." I laughed quietly before I could stop myself. The sound surprised even me. "That is funny." One dark eyebrow lifted. "Why?" I looked at him for the first time since sitting down. "Because everybody says that right before something bad happens." His expression did not change. "And has something bad happened?" The question landed harder than it should have. I crossed my arms instinctively. "I am fine." "No." His answer came immediately. "You are functioning." That is not the same thing. The room fell silent again. I hated how easily he saw through me. We had spoken less than 5 minutes. Yet he seemed to notice things people who had known me for years ignored. I stood up. "If this meeting is over, I should get back to work." "Sit down." His voice never rose. Somehow that made it impossible to ignore. I remained standing. For a second, neither of us moved. Then something unexpected happened. Dominic leaned back in his chair and nodded once. "All right." I blinked. "What? You want to leave?" "Leave." That was not the response I expected. "That is it. That is it." Suspicion immediately replaced relief. Nobody that powerful gave up that easily. "You are not going to stop me?" "No." He folded his hands on the desk. "Because eventually you will realize I am not your problem." The certainty in his voice unsettled me. I grabbed the back of the chair. "You do not know anything about me." "No," he asked calmly. "You arrived early every shift for the last 6 months. You never call out sick. You pick up extra hours whenever somebody quits. You eat dinner alone in the employee break room. You avoid eye contact whenever personal questions come up. And tonight you looked terrified when that man approached you." My stomach tightened. "You had people watching me?" "I own the restaurant." He held my gaze. I noticed things. For some reason, that answer felt worse. Not because it was threatening, because it sounded honest. I suddenly realized how tired I was. Not physically, emotionally. Tired of carrying everything alone. Tired of pretending every day was normal. Tired of convincing myself things would somehow get better on their own. Dominic seemed to notice the change immediately. His expression softened by the smallest amount. Barely visible. "Emily." My eyes met his again. "Whatever is happening outside these walls," he said quietly, "you do not have to handle it by yourself." The words should not have affected me. They should have bounced right off the walls I had spent years building. Instead, something dangerous happened. For the first time in a very long time, I almost wanted to believe someone meant them. The hardest lies to escape are the ones you tell yourself. I left Dominic's office 20 minutes later convinced that nothing had changed. I returned to the dining room, finished my shift, smiled at customers, refilled drinks, collected checks. By midnight, I was standing outside the employee entrance pulling my coat tighter against the cold rain. Everything looked normal. That should have comforted me. Instead, it felt strange, almost disappointing. I hated myself for thinking that. A black sedan waited across the street. I noticed it immediately. New York taught you to notice things. The engine was running. The headlights were off. I told myself it was probably a rideshare driver waiting for a customer. I walked toward the subway station anyway. The sedan never moved. The next morning, I woke up in my tiny apartment with a headache and 3 missed calls from Ryan. My stomach tightened the moment I saw his name. A text message sat underneath them. "Call me. We need to talk." Nothing else. No apology. No explanation. Just the same familiar weight hidden inside ordinary words. I dropped the phone onto the kitchen counter and focused on making coffee. Outside, Brooklyn was waking up. Delivery trucks rumbled through the street. Someone shouted from a nearby food cart. Life continued. Normal. Predictable. Safe. At least that was what I wanted to believe. Across Manhattan, Dominic Russo was staring at a folder with my name on it. I did not know that yet. I would not learn the truth until much later. But while I spent the morning convincing myself everything was under control, people were quietly putting together pieces of a puzzle I had spent years hiding. Employment records, emergency contacts, apartment leases, public information. Nothing illegal, nothing dramatic. Just facts. Facts that painted a picture I had worked very hard to keep invisible. By lunchtime, Vincent Hale stood inside Dominic's office holding a second folder. 3 years, Vincent said. Dominic looked up slowly. "You are sure?" Vincent nodded. "Neighbors, building staff, former co-workers. Same pattern every time." Dominic's jaw tightened. "Barely noticeable. Most people would have missed it." Vincent did not. "She never reported anything," he added. "No." Dominic looked back down at the file. "People rarely do." Silence settled over the room. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Below them, Manhattan moved through another busy afternoon. Above it all, one of the most powerful men in the city sat perfectly still, reading, thinking, growing angrier with every page. Not because of what happened yesterday, because of how long it had been happening before yesterday. Meanwhile, I arrived for my evening shift and immediately sensed something was different. The hostess smiled at me. The manager asked if I needed a break. Even the kitchen staff seemed unusually polite. It was unsettling. Then I spotted Vincent standing near the bar. He was watching me. Not constantly. Not obviously. Just enough for me to notice. When our eyes met, he offered a small nod. Nothing more. A strange feeling settled into my chest. The feeling that invisible gears were turning somewhere beyond my view. The feeling that decisions were being made without my knowledge. And for the first time, I began to suspect Dominic Russo had not forgotten our conversation. He had simply started asking questions nobody else ever bothered to ask. Sometimes protection does not arrive as a bodyguard standing beside you. Sometimes it arrives disguised as coincidence. That week, my schedule changed 3 times. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Then my closing shifts disappeared entirely. The late-night subway rides I hated were suddenly replaced with earlier hours. When I asked my manager what happened, he shrugged. "New staffing plan." That was all he said. 2 days later, a security camera appeared near the employee entrance. Then another one overlooking the alley behind the building. The kitchen staff joked about management becoming paranoid. Nobody else seemed bothered. I could not stop noticing. The strange part was that everything felt easier. Deliveries arrived on time. Problem customers were quietly handled before they became problems. If someone made me uncomfortable, a manager somehow appeared nearby within minutes. It was subtle, almost invisible. But once I saw it, I could not unsee it. On Thursday evening, I walked out after my shift and found a black umbrella waiting beside the employee exit. A small note sat underneath it. "Rain tonight. Do not get soaked." No signature. No explanation. I looked up immediately. The sky above Manhattan was dark with storm clouds. I should have left the umbrella where it was. Instead, I carried it home. The next morning, I found myself thinking about Dominic Russo more than I wanted to admit. Not because I trusted him. I did not. Men with that kind of power did not spend time worrying about waitresses from Brooklyn. Yet every unusual thing that happened seemed connected to him. Every small act of protection pointed in the same direction. By Friday, even Ryan noticed something was different. He called twice during my shift, then 3 times after. I ignored every call. A text message appeared 20 minutes later. "You have been acting strange lately." The message made my stomach tighten, not because of what it said, because of how quickly I deleted it. A month ago, I would have answered immediately. A month ago, I would have worried about disappointing him. Now another voice kept interrupting those old habits. "You do not have to handle it by yourself." I hated how often I remembered those words. That evening, I was carrying a tray of sparkling water through the dining room when I felt someone watching me. I looked up automatically. The private balcony overlooking the restaurant sat in darkness except for a single lamp. Dominic stood there, motionless, one hand in his pocket, his blue eyes fixed on the crowd below, fixed on me. For a second, neither of us looked away. Then he gave the smallest nod. Not ownership, not control, something else. Recognition. As if he wanted me to know he was paying attention. As if he wanted me to know I was not invisible anymore. I should have been annoyed. Instead, a strange warmth settled in my chest. And that frightened me more than anything, because for the first time in years, safety was beginning to feel possible. The moment safety starts feeling real is often the moment life tests whether you truly believe in it. Saturday began like any other day. I woke up late, made coffee, ignored 2 messages from Ryan. The sky above Brooklyn was clear for the first time all week, and for a few hours I allowed myself to imagine a different future. One without constant anxiety. One without looking over my shoulder every time my phone rang. By noon I was heading toward work when I noticed something strange. A man stood across the street from my apartment building pretending to read a newspaper. He looked familiar. Not personally familiar. Professionally familiar. Like someone I had seen around Russo's. The realization made my pulse quicken. Before I could think about it further, a delivery truck passed between us. When it moved on, the man was gone. The rest of the afternoon felt wrong. Small things kept happening. A call from an unknown number. A text message with no content. A strange feeling that someone was watching. I told myself I was imagining it. By 6 o'clock the restaurant was packed. The dinner rush swallowed my attention completely. For 4 hours I barely had time to breathe. Then, just after 10, my manager approached. "Emily, there is a problem with one of the supply orders." I frowned. "What kind of problem?" "Wrong delivery location. Can you check something in the storage building across the street?" It seemed harmless. Routine. I followed him outside through the employee exit. The city air felt colder than expected. Traffic rolled past. Neon lights reflected on wet pavement. Everything looked normal. Until I reached the corner and realized nobody was there. No manager. No delivery. Nothing. Confusion replaced annoyance. I pulled out my phone. No signal. That had never happened before. My stomach tightened. For the first time in weeks, genuine fear returned. I turned back toward the restaurant. A black SUV sat parked half a block away. The engine running. Dark windows. Familiar. Not because I recognized the vehicle. Because Ryan had once mentioned borrowing a similar one from a friend. My heartbeat stumbled. Another text appeared on my screen the second the signal returned. "We need to talk. Right now?" I froze. The message should not have frightened me. Yet something about it felt different. Desperate. Angry. Final. Across Manhattan, 30 floors above the city, Dominic Russo was ending a meeting when Vincent's phone rang. The call lasted less than 10 seconds. Vincent's expression changed immediately. "She is not inside the restaurant." Dominic looked up. "What do you mean?" "Nobody can find her." Silence filled the office. Dangerous silence. Dominic stood so quickly his chair rolled backward across the floor. For the first time since I had met him, the calm mask disappeared completely. His eyes turned cold as winter. "Check every camera." Vincent was already moving. "We are on it." Dominic walked toward the window overlooking the city. Thousands of lights stretched to the horizon. Somewhere inside that sea of people, I had vanished. And for the first time since this began, the man who controlled everything realized there was one thing he could not control: whether he would find me in time. Fear changes the way time moves. Every minute feels longer. Every sound feels louder. I stood beneath a flickering streetlight, gripping my phone so tightly my fingers hurt. Cars passed. Horns echoed through the city. Somewhere nearby, A siren wailed and faded into the distance. Ryan's message remained on my screen. We need to talk. Right now? My instincts screamed at me to leave, to go back inside the restaurant, to call someone, anyone. But before I could move, another message appeared. I am not here to fight. Please, just 5 minutes. I closed my eyes. 5 minutes. That was how these conversations always started. 5 minutes became an hour. An apology became an argument. A promise became disappointment. I was tired of the cycle, tired of carrying it, tired of believing things would somehow become different. Across the city, Dominic Russo watched security footage play across multiple screens. Vincent stood beside him while technicians rewound camera angles from every entrance surrounding the restaurant. There I was leaving the building. There I was crossing the street. There I was stopping near the corner. Then the image froze. Dominic stepped closer. Who was that? A man appeared briefly in the frame. Not clear enough for a positive identification, but clear enough for Dominic's expression to darken. Vincent immediately made a call. Another followed. Within minutes, information began arriving from places I did not even know existed. Traffic cameras, parking records, witness reports, fragments, pieces, clues. Dominic absorbed all of it without speaking. The room moved around him at full speed while he remained perfectly still. Then a photograph landed on the desk. Ryan. Dominic stared at it for several seconds. Find him, he said quietly. Meanwhile, I finally forced myself to move. Not toward the SUV. Not toward the message. Away. I turned and started walking back toward Russo's. Relief washed through me with every step. I had made my decision. Whatever happened next, I was done letting fear make choices for me. Then my phone rang. The number belonged to my landlord. Confused, I answered. Hello. His voice sounded nervous. Emily, there is someone asking questions about you at the building. My stomach dropped. Who? I do not know, but it did not feel right. The call ended 30 seconds later. My pulse accelerated. Suddenly, every shadow looked different. Every stranger seemed suspicious. I crossed the street quickly. Then quicker. The bright lights of the restaurant appeared ahead. Safe. Familiar. Home, in a strange way. A black sedan pulled to the curb beside me. The rear door opened. Vincent stepped out. Emily. I froze. What are you doing here? Mr. Russo asked me to bring you back. His expression was unusually serious. Now, something in his voice erased any temptation to argue. I climbed into the car. The moment the door closed, Vincent exhaled slowly, as though he had been holding his breath. What is going on? I asked. He looked out the window before answering. Someone is looking for you. My heart stumbled. Ryan. Vincent did not respond immediately. Mr. Russo would prefer that you remain somewhere secure until we know more. I stared at him. Somewhere secure. For the first time, I understood the scale of what was happening. This was no longer about a difficult relationship. No longer about uncomfortable conversations. Somewhere along the way, Dominic Russo had decided my safety mattered. And judging by the concern in Vincent's eyes, he was willing to move the entire city to make sure nothing happened to me. The penthouse did not feel like a prison. That was what made it so confusing. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan. Soft music played somewhere in the background. The kitchen was stocked with more food than I could eat in a month. Yet none of that explained why one of the most powerful men in New York had rearranged his entire world because of me. I stood beside the window long after midnight, watching the city lights shimmer beneath the darkness. Sleep refused to come. Every time I closed my eyes, I remembered Vincent's words. Someone is looking for you. A quiet knock interrupted my thoughts. Before I could answer, the door opened. Dominic stepped inside. He had removed his suit jacket. The sleeves of his white shirt were rolled to his forearms. For the first time since meeting him, he looked tired. Not physically, emotionally. The sight surprised me. Men like Dominic Russo were not supposed to look human. They were supposed to be untouchable, unshakable. Yet there he stood, silent, watching me. You should be sleeping, he said. I laughed softly. I could say the same thing. A faint smile touched his face before disappearing. Fair point. Silence settled between us. Comfortable this time. Not awkward. Not heavy. Just quiet. Finally, I turned toward him. Why are you doing this? His expression did not change. Doing what? Protecting me. His eyes held mine. Because you need protection. That is not an answer. For a moment, I thought he might avoid the question. Instead, he walked closer and stopped a few feet away. The first day you worked at Russo's, You stayed 2 hours after your shift ended. I blinked. What? An elderly customer became sick during dinner. Dominic's voice remained calm. The ambulance was delayed. You stayed with him until help arrived. I stared at him. The memory surfaced immediately. It had happened almost a year ago. I barely remembered it. How do you know that? Because I own the restaurant. He looked away briefly toward the city lights. And because people rarely do the right thing when nobody is watching. Something tightened in my chest. That was one night. There were others. His gaze returned to mine. You cover shifts for coworkers. You leave larger tips for the kitchen staff than you can afford. You bring food home for a homeless veteran who sits near the subway station. My breath caught. I had never told anyone that. Dominic noticed my surprise. You think nobody sees you, Emily. His voice softened. You are wrong. For several seconds I could not speak. Suddenly, all the strange changes from the past weeks made sense. The schedule adjustments. The extra security. The umbrella. The quiet protection surrounding me. None of it had started after our conversation. Dominic had been paying attention long before that night. Long before I noticed him. How long? I whispered. He looked at me carefully. Then he answered with complete honesty. Long enough to know you deserved better than what you were accepting. The words hit harder than any grand declaration ever could. Because for the first time, I realized Dominic Russo had not stepped into my life because he felt responsible. He stepped into it because somewhere along the way, he had started to care. Some endings do not arrive with fireworks. They arrive quietly, like sunlight after a storm. 3 weeks later, I walked back into Russo's through the front entrance instead of the employee door. The city outside was covered in the soft gold light of early autumn. People hurried along Fifth Avenue carrying coffee cups and shopping bags. Life moved forward. For the first time in years, so did I. A lot had changed. Ryan was no longer part of my life. The endless cycle of fear and uncertainty had finally ended. Not because someone fought my battles for me. Because I finally stopped believing I deserved to live inside them. Dominic had helped me see that. More importantly, he had waited for me to see it myself. The restaurant looked exactly the same. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath chandeliers. Conversations drifted through the dining room. The smell of fresh bread filled the air. Yet somehow everything felt different. Maybe because I was different. Good morning, Emily. The hostess smiled. Good morning. I smiled back. A real smile. Not one I forced for customers. Not one I wore to survive another shift. A genuine one. The kind I had almost forgotten existed. As I crossed the dining room, I noticed employees greeting me warmly. The kitchen staff waved. Even my manager seemed unusually cheerful. It took me a moment to understand why. For weeks, people had watched me become someone new. Someone stronger. Someone happier. I stepped onto the private elevator and rode to the top floor. The doors opened onto the familiar penthouse level. Dominic stood near the windows overlooking Manhattan. One hand rested in his pocket. The morning sunlight illuminated the skyline behind him. For a second, he looked less like the man everyone feared and more like the man I had come to know. The man who noticed when people were hurting. The man who quietly left umbrellas for waitresses. The man who remembered small acts of kindness nobody else saw. He turned when he heard me approach. His expression softened immediately. You are early. I learned that from my boss. A rare smile appeared. Smart answer. I joined him beside the glass. Below us, New York stretched in every direction. Endless possibilities. Endless beginnings. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence felt comfortable now. Familiar. Safe. Finally, I looked at him. Thank you. Dominic shook his head slightly. For what? For seeing me. His eyes held mine. Emily. His voice was quiet. You were never invisible. Emotion tightened my throat. Because deep down, that was what I had wanted all along. Not rescue. Not money. Not power. Just to matter. Just to know someone cared enough to notice. Dominic reached for my hand. His grip was warm. Steady. Certain. And for the first time, I did not pull away from happiness because I was afraid it would disappear. Outside, the city continued rushing through another ordinary day. Inside, everything felt different. The safest place in New York was not a penthouse. It was not a restaurant. It was not a building at all. It was standing beside someone who reminded you of your worth when you had forgotten it yourself. Looking back now, I sometimes think about that night when a single drop of blood fell onto a polished floor and changed the course of my life. Everyone else saw a problem. Dominic Russo saw a person. And in the end, that made all the difference.